Good morning, everyone. David Springall. I'm founder of Yospace, and I'm here to talk about the standards that will underpin and create the next generation of ad insertion. So just a little bit about Yospace. We just entirely specialize in ad insertion. With our first production delivery was in 2011, so we've got 14 plus years of experience of this. We stitch about 8 billion ads a month. In terms of monetization, there are sort of 4 pillars that I'm going to be referring to as I sort of take you through the history of ad insertion and the future. And those pillars are determining where you can put the advertising, placement opportunities, the insertion of the advertising itself, and then the decisioning. I'm using quotes for decisioning because it's decisioning, trading, and a whole ecosystem of getting ads bought and sold, and the measurement of the ads once they're displayed. These are the 4 main pillars of what monetization relates to, and these pillars are divided into 2 main categories. On the left is actually a streaming tech concern, and on the right is an ad tech concern. And I'm going to make this distinction a number of times through this presentation, and it's useful to bear this in mind, effectively these 2 camps of interest. So Dynamic Ad Insertion 3.0 isn't yet with us, but I'm going to describe the evolution from where we started and how we're going to get there. So the very first type of ad insertion was known as client-side ad insertion, and the concept was that inside, this is the user's player environment, the user's device, there was a player and there was an SDK, and that SDK was in itself its own player. It talked to this ad tech ecosystem that delivered ads, first-party ads and third-party ads, and there would be some proprietary method of determining where the ad positions were going to be, and the player would be stopped, and then the SDK would play the ad. So ultimately, the playback of the ad, the measurement, it was all sort of built into one piece of software that you had to write and deploy on every single platform. So that evolved into server-side ad insertion, where we pushed as much of this into the network as possible, in which we manipulated the stream that the player presented to insert advertising. So the request to the decision-making part of the ecosystem was now done server-side. There were some benefits for this in terms of user privacy and so on. But also, it meant that what was actually on the device was much smaller or much less complicated and easier to port. In the case of Yospace, we have an SDK that we make available to customers to do super accurate measurement, but you can also do the measurement server-side as well if you can't put an SDK here. So measurement in SSAI could be done server-side, or it can be done client-side. And we've got sort of better consistency of experience because we're controlling the protocol, the streaming protocol, and inserting the ads, and easier portability. So that is SSAI. The new sort of buzzword at the moment is something called SGAI, which is server-guided ad insertion. And how this differs from SSAI is fundamentally that in SSAI, we are stitching ads into the content. So the manifest that is delivered to the player that describes where the segments actually live is manipulated by the server-side component. The player just loads each segment in turn. It doesn't really know whether it's playing content or ads. That's the responsibility of the server to do that. That's SSAI. SGAI is where the player is given the content manifest, which is unmodified, but at certain points, it is given a pointer to another manifest, which contains the ads. So in the case of live, you can think of the timeline. This is the content timeline. And somewhere in the manifest will be a pointer to a new manifest, which the player then stitches into the presentation and then returns back to the content manifest. In the case of SGAI on VOD, it looks more like this, where the content timeline, an interstitial ad is played, and then we return to the timeline. So how that looks in our sort of schematic is like this. We have now the player is doing the stitching. There is still a server element, which is responsible for telling the player where to do the stitching. The content media is defining where the placement opportunities are, and then there is still the interface with the ad server and the ad tech ecosystem still happening server-side. So some people say to me that SGAI is actually a return to client-side advertising, ad insertion, but it's really not. It's actually an optimization to SSAI, in that architecturally it is much more similar to SSAI. In the player, because it's now being standardized, we can rely on commercial or open source players to do this stitching in a consistent way. So delivering the same consistency as SSAI, but with less horsepower on the server side to make this work. What is not included in SGAI is the concept of measurement. Now, today, if you were implementing an SGAI solution, you will still have to solve the measurement problem in some proprietary method. With our customers, we obviously still provide our SDK, which is compatible with both modes. But the point I'm making here is that SGAI is not a panacea for monetization yet. And this is the second part of the presentation, which is what is being done in the standards world to bridge this, to create what we will hopefully call Dynamic Ad Insertion 3.0, which is all of the aspects of ad insertion being standardized. So there are three bodies that are relevant to this. There will be more, but these are the three key. And that's the ad tech side, the IAB, which is responsible for the protocols that relate to the decisioning, the trading, OpenRTB, VAST, and some playback or creative format elements. The SVTA, which is which has been around for some time but has subsumed the -IF, is on the streaming tech side, which concerns itself with opportunity signaling, ad insertion, liaising with Apple on the HLS side of things, the signaling, and also, as I'll talk about a bit later, client-side tracking. CTA WAVE, through the CMCD v2 protocol, is also involved with playback observability, which also helps with measurement. And I'm going to be covering these points in a later slide. So the organizations or the activity looks like this. The IAB is over here working on these new formats, which I'm going to cover in a moment. Yospace is here, sitting on the working group for IAB on this, and also in this SVTA. Surprisingly, we discovered we were the only people on the IAB and the SVTA working groups working on this. So if you guys are there's anybody here that's similar to Yospace, you should come and join us. And this is a sort of indicative of a point I'm going to make later, which is the collaboration that's needed between the streaming tech world and the ad tech world in order to bring forward these standards to provide a comprehensive dynamic ad insertion capability. So the CTA WAVE, we're working on playhead reporting. SVTA is working on SGAI and also its own tracking capabilities. SGAI is working on signaling, and the IAB is working on these ad formats. So what are these ad formats? Well, why do we have to standardize ad formats? Well, the advertisers need this guidance in order so they can author their creatives that they can then deliver against multiple networks in multiple locations. So these are the sorts of things that the IAB are working on in order to create standardization on these formats. The IAB ran something called the Ad Format Hero, where they took 100 formats and they voted on the top 8 that they would then turn into standards. And they're, at the moment, modifying the appropriate protocols and specifications, such as open real-time bidding, VAST, and CIMID, in order to accommodate these new formats. These formats look like this. These, I'm just going to whiz through these. Pause ads, overlays over content, content squeezebacks, side by side, where the ad is a standard 16:9 ad. L-shaped squeezebacks, although actually what we think is actually going to happen is this will be a J-shaped, or sort of a J, J-shaped squeezeback rather than an L-shape. Ad with squeezebacks. This is more of a sort of a display type format. Menu ads, and in-scene insertion. So, oh, and also finally the immersive extensible ads for VOD. So, talking about these ad formats, and then what about the measurement? So today, as I mentioned, if you're doing an SGAI implementation, you have a server-side component, and you might have a measurement SDK. This is proprietary at the moment. What the SVTA are working on is a ad signaling specification, which effectively delivers all of the tracking pixels to the player, and the player fires them. This is a fairly heavy specification, but this will mean that the player does the tracking automatically. Alternatively, we are extending the CMC v2, which is an observability standard, to provide playhead tracking events back to the SGAI server, so the SGAI server can then fire the measurement on the server side. Now, this is complementary to the SVTA proposal in the sense that it is available to low capability players. It's very simple, just simply to send the playhead position over the network. Of course, CMC v2 is not just for advertising, it's advertising tracking. It's for all sorts of observability, such as quality of service and so on and so forth, quality of experience and so on. So, in conclusion, SGAI, which has got a lot of it's got a lot of buzz around it at the moment, represents the latest step forward in the evolution of ad insertion. But at this time, the standards that relate to it only relate to that of ad insertion and not measurement and the new formats, although you may have seen lots of excitement about L-squeezes and these formats, but none of these have been standardized yet. And the work that's being done in the SVTA is to work alongside the IAB to ensure that the capabilities that are being described in the IAB are able to be implemented in a standard way inside the player. So the SGAI has kind of been a catalyst for an improved collaboration between the IAB and the SVTA on the streaming tech world in order to try to align capabilities of players with what is being defined in the ad tech world. So DAI 3.0 isn't quite yet on with us. We're probably on 2.5 or Edge or GPRS dynamic ad insertion, but the work that is being done in these standards will allow broadcasters to standardize on these new formats to create new inventory for advertisers and to allow advertisers to scale new creatives across multiple networks, which will be a benefit for the industry as a whole. And I thank you very much for your attention.